For 12 years, across the battle-scarred landscapes of Europe, a name whispered in fear carried the weight of tyranny, the Gestapo. From its formation on April 26, 1933, to its collapse in May 1945, this secret police of Nazi Germany wove a web of terror, infiltrating every corner of the occupied territories. Behind closed doors, within fortified walls, their torture chambers became the stuff of nightmares, places where defiance was crushed, where secrets were ripped from unwilling lips, where the very concept of hope was dismantled piece by piece. At the heart of this machinery of repression stood Prinz-Albrecht-Straße 8 in Berlin, the headquarters of the Gestapo. What appeared on the outside as an imposing neoclassical structure was, on the inside, a labyrinth of suffering. Dim corridors twisted and turned, leading prisoners to interrogation rooms where they faced unspeakable horrors. Designed with meticulous cruelty, the very architecture worked to disorient those who entered. Cells were deliberately cramped, barely large enough for a person to stand, yet too small for them to rest. In some, harsh electric light burned perpetually. In others, pitch darkness deprived captives of all sense of time. One survivor, Rudolf Diels, the Gestapo's first director who later defected, described the building as a temple of fear. Here, the condemned awaited their fate, listening to the muffled screams of others, a calculated psychological weapon meant to break the mind before the body. The corridors echoed with the sound of rubber truncheons striking flesh, of interrogators demanding confessions, of footsteps that signaled the arrival of yet another doomed prisoner. The interrogators employed both brute force and psychological warfare. Some prisoners were subjected to beatings so severe that they were left permanently disabled. Others were psychologically broken, forced to endure mock executions, where they would hear the click of an empty gun chamber or the fake orders for their hanging, only to be thrown back into their cells, left to wrestle with their shattered nerves. There was no set pattern to the torture. Some prisoners were questioned endlessly, forced to stand for days without sleep, collapsing from exhaustion, only to be kicked back up. Others were confined in soundproofed rooms where their own screams could not escape, amplifying their isolation. Water torture, electric shocks, and forced exposure to extreme temperatures were all common methods used to extract information. Many prisoners were never officially registered, their existence erased from records. These ghost prisoners simply vanished, their fate known only to their captors. The facility was not just a prison, but a nerve center for orchestrating terror across occupied Europe. Here, orders were issued for mass arrests, and elaborate surveillance networks were constructed to crush resistance movements. The Gestapo's network of informants and spies was vast, ensuring that even a whisper of dissent could lead an individual to Prinz-Albrecht-Straße, where they would be lost in the depths of its dungeons. By the end of the war, this building had become infamous across Europe, its very name enough to instill terror in the hearts of those who opposed Nazi rule. Yet, after the fall of the Third Reich, the site did not immediately become a place of remembrance. The ruins of the Gestapo headquarters remained abandoned for years, a haunting reminder of what had transpired within its walls. It was only in later decades that historians and survivors fought to preserve it as a testament to those who had suffered. Today, the site houses the Topography of Terror Museum, a stark monument to the atrocities once committed there. But long before it became a place of education, it was a house of nightmares. Visitors now walk through the remnants of a place where thousands met their end. where the shadows of history still linger, whispering the stories of those who never left. The Gestapo's brutality was not confined to the German capital. Across occupied Europe, secret police outposts turned mansions, forts, and office buildings into hubs of terror. In Belgium, the medieval Fort Breendonk was repurposed into a Gestapo interrogation center. Its thick stone walls, once meant to defend against invasion, now served to keep victims trapped inside a world of unrelenting suffering. The air was stagnant with the scent of damp stone and human despair. One of the most feared figures here was Fernand Weiss, a man whose sadism earned him the title, the Butcher of Breendonk. Under his direction, prisoners were subjected to relentless beatings, prolonged exposure to freezing conditions, and starvation. Survivors later recalled the infamous bunker, a concrete-walled chamber with a drain at its center, a silent witness to the agony that unfolded within. In the Netherlands, the Gestapo established their headquarters at Euterpestraat in Amsterdam, turning a former school into a house of torment. The classrooms that once rang with the voices of children became soundproofed interrogation chambers where Dutch resistance members faced brutal interrogations. Many were beaten to death, while others disappeared into the Nazi prison system, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, in Norway, the Gestapo operated out of Victoria Terrasse in Oslo, a building that soon became infamous for its relentless cruelty. Prisoners were subjected to psychological torture, forced to stand in stress positions for days, or made to endure extreme isolation. But the terror extended beyond the walls. Family members of suspected dissidents were also arrested and held as leverage. In France, the Gestapo controlled 84 Avenue Foch in Paris, a place where the methods of interrogation were as much psychological as they were physical. Resistance fighters were subjected to sleep deprivation, mock executions, and threats against their loved ones. The infamous Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon, directed many of these interrogations, ensuring that few ever left unbroken. Throughout occupied Europe, the Gestapo perfected its methods of fear. It was not just a force of oppression, it was a machine designed to dismantle resistance before it could take root. And in the wake of its collapse, the scars it left behind would remain long after the war had ended. In the heart of Nazi-occupied France, the Gestapo made its presence known at 84 Avenue Foch, a luxurious Parisian mansion twisted into a den of horror. The French resistance learned to dread its name, for those taken there seldom returned. Within its lavish halls, agents of terror extracted information through means that defied human decency. Cells were intentionally designed to be too small to sit or lie down in. Some prisoners were made to stand for days on end, their will eroded by sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Others endured psychological games like the infamous pistol test, a loaded gun placed on a table left for the captive to contemplate. Would they use it to end their torment, or was it a bluff? The answer often came too late. Among those who suffered here was Jean Moulin, a unifying figure of the French resistance. His capture in 1943 by Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, led to weeks of relentless torture. Moulin endured brutal beatings, the tearing of his fingernails, and repeated interrogations. Yet despite it all, he refused to betray his comrades. He died from his injuries, his silence a final act of defiance. Beyond Jean Moulin, countless others faced similar fates. Women of the Resistance, including Odette Sansom and Violette Sabo, were held in these very rooms before being sent to concentration camps. Some were subjected to mock trials, forced to listen as their death sentences were read aloud, only to be tormented further before execution. The mansion became infamous for its cruel efficiency. Interrogations were swift and merciless, designed to break even the strongest minds. Prisoners were forced to witness the torture of their comrades, a psychological ploy to shatter morale. The Gestapo turned each interrogation into a masterclass of manipulation, using fear, deception, and outright violence to force confessions. Today, 84 Avenue Foch stands as a silent testament to the horrors inflicted upon those who resisted Nazi rule. Though time has passed, the memory of what transpired within its walls remains a chilling reminder of the price paid for freedom. In Poland, at Avenue Foch 25, another Gestapo stronghold loomed over the shattered city of Warsaw. Here, methods of cruelty reached new depths. Prisoners were left to starve in solitary confinement or forced to listen to the screams of their comrades in adjacent cells. One particularly perverse tactic involved bringing in items belonging to a prisoner's family, a child's toy, a wife's scarf, suggesting that their loved ones were also in Gestapo custody. Torture in Foch was not limited to physical abuse. Psychological torment was employed with equal precision. Prisoners were made to believe they would be released, only to be sent back to their cells at the last moment. Some were forced to listen to false executions, the sound of gunshots echoing through the halls, leaving them to wonder who had just perished. The deprivation of food and water, combined with sleep exhaustion, often broke even the most resilient resistance members. During the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, the Gestapo's savagery reached its peak. Captured resistance fighters, including women and children, were executed en masse in a bid to crush Polish defiance. Entire families were rounded up and tortured for information, their homes burned as the city was reduced to rubble. Those who weren't shot were sent to concentration camps, their fate sealed the moment they crossed Foch's threshold. Gestapo agents in Warsaw perfected methods of humiliation and degradation. Prisoners were forced to crawl on all fours, barking like dogs, or to strip naked and perform humiliating acts under threat of immediate execution. These tactics were not just meant to extract information, but to destroy any semblance of dignity, to strip individuals of their humanity before delivering the final blow. Despite this brutality, the Polish resistance never wavered. Many prisoners, even under immense torture, refused to betray their comrades, knowing that any confession could lead to mass arrests and executions. The walls of Foch bore testimony to their courage, etched with messages from those who knew they would never leave. We fought for freedom. Do not let our deaths be in vain. Today, the site is the mausoleum of struggle and martyrdom, where visitors can see the original inscriptions left behind by prisoners. The preserved cells, the iron doors, and the remains of torture instruments serve as a solemn reminder of the horrors inflicted upon the Polish people. The voices of the past, though silenced by violence, continue to echo through history, urging the world to never forget. Physical torture was only one tool in the Gestapo's arsenal. Psychological torment was wielded with an equally devastating effect. In interrogation centers across Europe, sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, and mock executions shattered the will of prisoners. Some were forced to listen to recordings of other prisoners screaming, unsure if they were real or staged. Others were made to watch executions of fellow captives, knowing that they could be next. At the Gestapo prison in Hamburg, cells were painted in disorienting patterns, their floors uneven, forcing prisoners to stay unbalanced. The very walls seemed to warp reality, turning confinement into a waking nightmare. One survivor described the experience as living inside a fractured mind where time, space, and sanity dissolved. By May 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, the Gestapo's chambers of horror fell silent. Many of the organization's highest-ranking officers, including Ernst Kaltenbrunner, were tried and executed at Nuremberg. Others, like Klaus Barbie, fled justice for decades, only to be captured years later and sentenced for crimes against humanity. Yet, for the countless victims who perished in these rooms of agony, justice came too late. The Gestapo had left behind more than just ruins and corpses. It had scarred the very soul of Europe. As historian Simon Wiesenthal, himself a survivor, once said, "For evil to flourish, it only requires good men to do nothing." The lessons of the Gestapo's reign serve as an eternal warning. When fear is weaponized, when power is unchecked, and when cruelty becomes systematic, history can take its darkest turns.